It's been a hectic 5 days, and our minivan has seen a lot of miles. Now, just 20 minutes after getting back home, I find myself on the porch, settled into my favorite old chair with a glass of rich, dark porter, musing over the fact that our twins are experiencing their first taste of independence. Miranda and I have officially become empty nesters, joining the ranks of countless other parents who have gone through the same transition recently. But I'm willing to bet none of them feel as content as I do right now. Since Luke was attending Georgia Tech, our journey kicked off in Atlanta. It was convenient to drop off our rental car there, eliminating the need to keep switching drivers. The next day, we flew our daughter Kelly to Gainesville for her new adventure as a gator, while we continued eastward to Daytona Beach for some relaxation in the sun. Those 3 days were filled with more closeness than we've ever experienced in our marriage. Miranda was absolutely insatiable. Starting our family young, when we were just 18, means that at 36, our energy levels and libidos are still going strong. On our way back home, we made a quick pit stop at a deserted truck stop, where Miri amusingly tried to convince me that she had intentionally left her underwear behind. Now, as I relaxed in my chair, lost in pleasant thoughts, Miranda headed upstairs to freshen up with a shower. I was taken aback when I heard the hairdryer kick in, a sound typically reserved for her prepping for work or a night out. After the hairdryer's hum faded, I heard Miranda's footsteps and the clack of her heels in the kitchen. An unusual choice since she typically wore rubber-soled slippers or went barefoot around the house. Before I could ponder these oddities further, she called out to me, "Alan, honey, can you join me for a moment? I need to talk to you." Waking from my reverie, I rose from my chair, empty glass in hand, and replied cheerfully, "On my way, darling." Entering the kitchen, I was surprised to find Miranda seated at the table, looking fresh in a new blouse and clean jeans. She poured me a mug of freshly brewed coffee and set it down in front of her spot. Miranda appeared focused and a bit tense, leaving me puzzled as to what her serious demeanor signified. Slowly, I took the seat she had clearly reserved for me, awaiting her explanation. "What's up, Miri?" I asked warmly, taking the cup from her and sipping the strong, hot drink. "I'm leaving you, Alan," she said calmly and casually, grabbing a thick envelope. "I've got divorce papers here for you to go over and sign." She kept talking, but I was completely shocked and couldn't find any words. It felt like a sudden deafening blow out of nowhere. I'd never boxed before, but in that moment, I felt like a boxer reeling from a missed uppercut and a heavy knockdown. She pushed the envelope toward me, continuing to deliver monotone statements, each one hitting me like a pile driver to the brain. She seemed completely unaware of the shock I was in. "All the divorce terms are spelled out in these papers. I'm not asking for anything from you. You can do whatever you want with my things here. Our savings are split, bills paid up to today, and I've canceled all joint credit cards. I've updated my address with everyone who needs to know. You can get more details from your lawyer. If you need anything from me, only contact me through my lawyer." Taking a breath, Miranda carried on in her usual dispassionate, businesslike tone. "I also obtained a restraining order because I don't want any further contact with you once I leave. It's in this envelope as well. Additionally, I've changed my phone number and email address, and all my previous accounts are closed." She didn't anticipate a response from me, and I couldn't manage to say anything. I just sat there, silent and motionless, staring blankly at her across the table. The coffee in front of me, barely touched, emitted a faint wisp of steam as it cooled. "Please," she cautioned, tapping her well-manicured, glossy nail on the tabletop. "Don't try to involve the children by extracting information from them. They're aware of what's going on and won't assist you. The same goes for my parents." Miranda, no longer indifferent or preoccupied with her hands, finally directed her cold gaze straight into my eyes. "I know you'll want answers, Alan, so I'll just say it. I've been with Dan for the past 13 years, and now I intend to make him my real full-time partner. I loved you, Alan. I just love Dan more. He's endured and waited long enough to deserve me. So today I'm ending things with you, and now I'll belong to him alone. That's all. Goodbye, Alan." Miranda concluded her speech, stood, and made her way to the exit. It wasn't until she picked up the bag by the door and opened it that I found my voice, managing to croak out just one word. "Why?" Still devoid of emotion, she paused, turned to meet my gaze, and uttered only 2 words. "Sandy Thompson." With that, she stepped over the threshold, slamming the door behind her. In the ensuing silence, all I heard were the faint clicks of her shoes, the muffled thud of a car door, and the gradually fading roar of an engine as she drove away, disappearing into the distance. That marked the last time I saw or spoke to Miranda for the next 16 months. At work, Dan Roberts was like a father figure to me, my closest friend for the past 18 years. Miri and Dan's wife, Lisa, had bonded during their pregnancies, both being close in age, Lisa at 22 and Miri just over 18. Additionally, their daughter Cassie was born a day after our twins, a coincidence that seemed like fate. This initial connection blossomed into a deep friendship, making our families practically inseparable. We spent weekends together, living just 2 blocks apart until our falling out. The moment that brought the twins into our lives occurred while both Miranda and I were in college. Miri had always aspired to study business or business management, while I pursued mathematics with the help of a partial scholarship, also playing on the college baseball team. At that time, I hadn't yet determined my future path. However, everything changed when Miri informed me of her pregnancy, necessitating that I set aside my aspirations and find employment to support our growing family. Our parents were incredibly supportive, taking charge of arranging and financing our wedding. Within 2 months, I became the sole focus of my parents' attention as their only child. They had welcomed me into the world later in life, approaching their 40s, and considered me a precious blessing after years of longing for a child. Miri had an older brother, Tom, who was 10 years her senior. Their familial bond was distant as Tom left for college when Miri was just 8 years old, rarely returning home thereafter. Tragically, Tom passed away in a peculiar car accident shortly after graduating from college. This event prompted Miranda's parents to shift their focus entirely to their only remaining child, mirroring the devotion my own parents had shown to me. As a wedding present, my parents officially handed over the deeds to our longtime family residence, as they themselves prepared to relocate further south. With retirement on the horizon, I secured a position selling insurance policies at a local firm, quickly acclimating to the industry and feeling right at home. While the starting salary for a new agent was modest, lucrative commissions from successful deals had the potential to nearly double my earnings, albeit at the cost of long hours, typically 12-hour days and occasional weekends. In the months leading up to the twins' arrival, Miri took on a part-time role as a secretary at an office, aiming to further her education while balancing her studies online. It was during this time that her parents' support proved invaluable, as they stepped in to help care for the newborns and eagerly visited to spend time with their grandchildren whenever possible. Tragedy struck 3 years later with the incident involving Sandy Thompson. Despite the challenges, I found success in my career, and my company nominated me for Salesperson of the Year for the North Carolina region. Our small yet growing company, which had recently become a market leader and was later acquired by a national corporation, believed in my potential. Along with a $2,500 bonus, I was awarded an all-expenses-paid trip to Washington, D.C., headquarters for a gala ceremony and dinner where the year's top seller would be announced, followed by 2 additional days to enjoy at leisure. For Miri and me, it marked our first time leaving the city together without the twins, and we were eagerly anticipating the trip. However, 2 days before our departure, everything unraveled. Firstly, Luke was diagnosed with whooping cough, followed by Kelly falling ill the next day. Despite the setback, my presence at the ceremony was mandatory. With a heavy heart, Miri bid me farewell on Friday morning, urging me to try and enjoy the next few days. Arriving an hour before the gala commenced, I checked in and informed them that I would be attending solo. After grooming and donning my rented tuxedo, I descended into the grand hall and located my seat, finding myself beside Sandy Thompson from our Little Rock office. While most attendees were in their 30s or older, Sandy was only a year my senior. At 21, this was her first full year with the company. Prior to this event, my experience with drinks was limited to a few beers, but the open bar at the dinner offered wine. As far as I recall, I only had a couple of glasses. When the awards were announced, I was utterly astonished to hear my name announced as Salesperson of the Year. Stunned, I ascended the stage to receive a trophy cup and a $10,000 check amidst thunderous applause. Upon returning to my seat, I was graciously gifted a bottle of champagne from our superiors. Honestly, the rest of the evening passed in a blur until I woke up at 5 a.m. the next morning. Finding myself lying next to the enticingly undressed Sandy Thompson, I was overwhelmed with fear, a pounding headache, and a severe hangover. I stumbled to my room, hastily packed my belongings, and was on my way home within 20 minutes. Miri was understandably surprised to see me return 4.5 hours later, and as expected, she was not pleased. When I confessed that I had gotten drunk at the gala dinner and woke up in another woman's bed the next morning, She abruptly cut me off, refusing to hear my explanations or excuses. The only question she had was the woman's name. Before I could respond, she announced that she was going to stay with her parents for a few days, quickly packing a bag, grabbing the car keys, and fleeing without a word, leaving me with the children. For 3 days, Miri ignored my calls, seemingly unwilling to even hear my voice. I returned to work on Tuesday after dropping the kids off at daycare. When I returned home that evening, Miri was already there, pretending as if nothing had happened between us. Any attempt to discuss the situation was met with a stern warning that she would leave with the children if I ever brought it up again. That night, she initiated lovemaking, but it was mechanical and lacked the closeness we once shared. It took many more months for that feeling to return, but eventually it did. At her request, we never mentioned the incident again. The next year, Miri graduated and earned her business degree, eager to find a job that would utilize her newfound knowledge. Our bond with Dan and Lisa flourished, leading us to spend every weekend together unless work obligations intervened. Despite this, our wives continued to meet and spend time together, albeit with some difficulty as Dan and Lisa moved 15 miles away to be closer to Dan's workplace. Interestingly, Miri's parents soon followed suit, relocating to the same area to rent a larger apartment that could accommodate their growing family and provide more space for their grandchildren. Additionally, they began caring for Robert's daughter, Cassie, granting Dan and Lisa a bit more flexibility. As Dan's company expanded rapidly, they found themselves in need of an office manager and a personal assistant for Dan himself. This role seemed tailor-made for Miri, and after impressing the managers during her interviews, she landed the job and thrived in it. Given her long-standing connection with the company and close relationship with Dan, she humorously earned the nickname Dan's work wife. This dynamic persisted for 7 years until tragedy struck. Lisa passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. Shockingly, this devastating event occurred on a day when she was visiting me, as was customary when Dan and Miri had to travel for business together. The loss deeply affected us all, but Dan bore the brunt of the grief. Overwhelmed by the tragedy, he struggled to cope alone and care for his 11-year-old daughter. So the plan was for Miranda to visit the Roberts house a few times a week after work to ensure everything was tidy and prepare dinners that could be easily reheated. That's how Miri explained it to me 16 months later. As I was about to leave the garage with the final box for my minivan, I paused to see Miri's car pulling into the driveway. It was her first return since that memorable conversation in the kitchen, where she coldly handed me the divorce papers. Naturally, seeing her today was the last thing I expected. I greeted her as she got out of the car. "Miranda, aren't you violating the restraining order by being here?" I asked calmly. "The order ceased to apply on the day we divorced," she dismissed, toying with her keyring. "How are you holding up?" I shrugged. "Taking things one day at a time. Would you like some coffee?" I called out, already heading back to the house. "That would be nice," she replied, following me inside. By now, the house was nearly empty, save for a few boxes and a lone dining table in the kitchen. Most of the furniture and household items had been sold to neighbors and acquaintances over the past couple of days, with the remaining items destined for the landfill. A colleague's son had volunteered to handle this task, along with his wife and friend, despite my attempts to refuse their help. A solitary greeting card sat on the mantelpiece in the living room. Since I had recently turned 38, my coworkers had gathered to send warm congratulations, along with another card wishing me luck in my new home, already packed among my belongings. The company I devoted over 19 years to had always treated me well, so leaving behind good friends filled me with sadness and regret. Yet, it was a necessary step. There was nothing tethering me there anymore. With coffee brewed and mugs in hand, we settled into the same seats where we had sat face-to-face 16 months prior. "So, what brings you back into my company on this lovely day?" I inquired with detached curiosity, unable to fathom why Miri had returned after abruptly severing ties between us. "Can't you guess?" she retorted, visibly displeased. "The kids received letters from you about your move. Why not just call them instead of sending registered mail?" "Well, actually, I did both," I clarified, explaining that it was the only way to ensure they received the news. "Otherwise, they might have thought I vanished without a word." I chuckled, then corrected myself. "Actually, I reached out to Kelly. I can't call Luke." "Why not?" Miri asked, puzzled. "I don't have his number," I sighed. "The truth is, the kids don't want to stay in touch with me," I admitted, noticing her skeptical expression. "I'll just have to prove to my ex-wife how our kids really feel," I added, grabbing my phone from the table and dialing Kelly's number on speaker. After 10 long beeps, it went to voicemail. I ended the call and looked at Miri. "Couldn't you try calling her? Would you mind? Kelly might just be busy," she replied, making excuses but still retrieving her phone and dialing our daughter's number, putting it on speaker. Interestingly, her call was promptly answered after the second ring. "Hi, Mom. How's it going?" Kelly's cheerful voice greeted. "I'm good, honey. What are you up to?" "Well, right now, Cassie and I are just hanging out. We have a party later, so we're just lounging around conserving energy," my daughter responded with a chuckle and a hint of laziness. "Have you heard anything from your father?" Miri asked, glancing at me with a meaningful raised eyebrow. "Yeah, I spoke to him last night. He said he talked to you and promised he'd pick up Cassie and me today. Yeah, in about 10 minutes. I think he's going to grab Luke later, too, before we all head to the party," Kelly chirped. My heart sank at the sound of my daughter calling him Dad. Miri, always perceptive, noticed how much that thoughtless comment from Kelly stung me. Clenching my fists, I leaned back in my chair and stared blankly at the ceiling. "You mean Dan?" Miri asked incredulously, as if unable to believe what she had just heard. "Well, yeah, Mom, who else?" Kelly continued to giggle. "By the way, he really likes it when I call him Dad. And besides, you know he'll officially be my father in 3 weeks, she reminded her mother. Believe it or not, my ex-wife was set to remarry in 3 weeks. They even sent me an invitation to their celebration. Yeah, right, like I'd actually attend. "Kellyanne, when was the last time you spoke to your biological father?" Miri impatiently inquired, her voice carrying stern undertones. "Oh, Mom, I don't recall. Maybe a few weeks ago," Kelly responded, her tone shifting from amused to concerned upon sensing something amiss in her mother's voice. I opened my call log and displayed it to her, revealing my numerous unsuccessful attempts to reach our daughter. Truth be told, none of my children have called me since Miri left. Not a single call in almost 1.5 years. That's odd to hear because I'm sitting right next to him now, and I saw firsthand how he tried to call you just a minute before I did. "What's going on, Kelly?" Miri questioned with an even sterner tone. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom. I just forgot," our daughter replied, her voice confused and sheepish through the speaker. "I just want to remind you," her mother said sharply, "you only have one father, and it's not Dan. We'll discuss this further later, young lady," she promised, concluding the conversation decisively and ending the call. Clearly upset, Miranda turned off the phone and pushed it away. "So why don't you have Luke's number?" she pressed again. "FYI, Dan made sure the boy had a new phone and memorized his number within hours of his old phone being stolen. If only I had known," I shrugged. "Listen, don't be too strict with the children. Apparently their love and affection for me vanished after just over 1 year," I said, smiling darkly as I intertwined my fingers tightly. "You heard your daughter. She's happy that she'll now have a new father. You know the old saying? Out of sight, out of mind. Well, apparently for Kelly, I'm already a non-entity." Pointing to my long list of calls on my phone, I continued, "As you can see, I no longer have anything to do with the children, and as far as I know, in 3 weeks, I'll be officially replaced by the real Dad." The truth in my comment seemed to hurt her, but it needed to be said. "Since you left, I've probably talked to them for no more than an hour combined, despite my efforts." "God, I really tried," I said bitterly, remembering a typical moment when I got tickets to the Braves game on opening day of the season. I was so excited. But when I called Luke with the news, he said he was too busy to have fun. Sighing, I looked up at Miri's frozen figure opposite me. Later, I found out he and Dan went to that very game, buying tickets at the last minute. Well, if that's what they want, I can't force them to choose otherwise. We fell silent for a moment, lost in our thoughts, before Miri changed the subject with a quiet cough. "So, you're moving out of here to be closer to your parents?" I asked. "Not exactly," she replied. "I have to leave so I can look after my mother, now. She needs constant care and attention." "Oh my God, did something happen to her? How does your father deal with this? You never mentioned any problems before," I said, concern evident in my voice. Well, at least Miri really cared about my parents, I thought to myself. "Mom has advanced Alzheimer's disease," she said solemnly. "It's pretty bad because she hardly remembers anything 90% of the time. And as for Dad, we buried him just over 3 weeks ago. The hospital said it was a heart attack, but personally I think he died from a broken heart, suffering too much from disappointment and pain." "Oh no," my ex-wife sobbed, bursting into tears. "How do you know it was a broken heart? And why didn't you call us?" "Of course I called," I objected wearily. "And to be honest, that was the last time I talked to Kelly. It was the day after Thanksgiving. That's when I found out Luke had a new number, and our conversation with Kelly lasted no more than a minute. She hastily blurted out that she was incredibly busy and would call me back soon. It's a pity she never did, neither that day nor a week later. I called her every day for a couple of weeks until I finally understood the reason. It's ironic that my kids blocked me on Facebook, but not my dad, I said sarcastically. I later found out that when Kelly told me she was very busy, it was because she was going to the Black Friday sale that day with you and Grandma Roberts. As for how I can know that my father died of a broken heart, that's easy. I never told my parents about our divorce. Yes, I was going to do it sooner or later, but I never could, I admitted, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. Brushing them away, I took a deep breath and continued. When you left, I went to them the next weekend to talk about what happened between us face to face. When I got there, I discovered how bad my mother's condition had become. Dad had told me before how forgetful she was sometimes, but since I last saw them the Christmas before last, her condition had seriously deteriorated. You obviously never knew about this because not once in the last 3 years have you been able to go with me to their place. When I took the children there, I couldn't resist directly hinting at those compelling reasons that, as we both know well now, prevented Miri from accompanying me and the children every time because of my mother's illness. I didn't have the right to bring this news to both of them. Then and every week it became more and more difficult to do this. After Thanksgiving dinner, once we had settled Mom for the night, Dad began pressing me with questions. It had been over a year since he'd heard from you or the kids. So, reluctantly, I told him the truth about our split and your departure. Miri, tense as a bowstring, sat across from me, elbows sharp on the table, hands covering her mouth. Tears glistened in her eyes, and her trembling eyelashes were the only signs of life on her pale face. The next morning, I found Dad in his favorite chair, clutching our family photo, still damp from his tears. Our divorce broke his heart, Miri. Mom and Dad were married for 52 years. He was old-fashioned and had hoped we'd be together until end of life parted us. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I recounted that dark day. Rising abruptly, I turned to the window, staring at the pale blue sky dotted with rare clouds. Miri's sniffles and quiet sobs echoed behind me. Leaning my throbbing forehead against the cool glass, a minute later I spoke softly again. It was at the funeral that I truly felt the weight of my loneliness. Only a few neighbors and the chaplain attended Dad's farewell. Nobody else came. I couldn't even bring Mom because she wouldn't understand what was happening. It was only a week or two after the funeral, once Mom had recovered somewhat, that I mustered the courage to tell her that Dad was gone. But it pains her every time she's reminded of it. So now, when she asks, I just tell her he's stepped out for a while and will be back soon. Miri openly wept, but my tears had dried up long ago. I had been utterly devastated emotionally in the preceding weeks. My gaze wandered aimlessly around the room until it landed on the solitary greeting card on the mantelpiece. Miri, with her tear-streaked eyes, followed my gaze and evidently noted what had caught my attention. I continued speaking in the same detached, distant tone. You know, maybe I'm alone now, and even my own mother fails to recognize me, but I owe her a debt for bringing me into this world. So yes, I'm packing up here to be there for her for however long she has left. Turning to my ex-wife, I straightened up, crossing my arms over my chest. A bitter, sarcastic grimace colored my final words to the woman I had loved deeply during our years together. Isn't it incredible, the fallout from your actions and how many lives it affected? You shattered our marriage. You severed my bond with my children. And to top it off, you tore apart my family. I concluded my speech, unable to contain the anger and accusatory tone I had vowed not to reveal, but it poured out nonetheless. "Don't you dare blame me for all of this," Miranda shot back, rising from her seat. "Unlike you, Dan is committed to me. And let's not forget that you replaced me with Sandy Thompson," she added, her face flushing as she pointed an accusatory finger at me. Her accusation caught me off guard, and instead of a defensive response, I burst into laughter, tears streaming down my cheeks. "Absolutely," I replied, barely catching my breath. "Let's not overlook Sandy Thompson, the reason you spent over 15 years meticulously plotting your revenge. I vividly recall that evening when you sternly warned me never to mention her name in this house, threatening to take the children and leave me forever if I did." My ex-wife raised her chin arrogantly, crossing her arms over her chest in defiance, her gaze fixed firmly on me. Well, Mary, now that you've followed through on all your threats, I believe that ship has sailed. But I still want to make one thing clear once and for all. I never laid a finger on Sandy Thompson, I declared emphatically, feeling a surge of relief as the words left my lips. Meeting Miranda's widened eyes, filled with shock and confusion, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as I continued in a calmer tone. When I woke up in her bed that morning, I was still dressed in the same tuxedo from the night before. Nothing happened between us. "Do you really expect me to believe this fairy tale?" Mary retorted, dripping with poisonous sarcasm. "Yes, I do expect you to believe me," I replied firmly. "I've never lied to you before, and I certainly have no reason to start now, especially when everything between us has long been over," I added, regaining my composure. "I don't care," she snapped dismissively, sounding more like Kelly than the woman I once knew. For some reason, her indifferent response irked me. Although I could tell she didn't believe me, it was oddly important to me that she did. I grabbed my phone and dialed my old office, motioning for Miranda to stay put and not interrupt. After just a couple of rings, Jane, the receptionist, answered promptly. "Hey, Jane, it's Alan Dowd." "Oh, hi, Alan. Have you finished sorting everything out?" my old friend replied cheerfully, likely gearing up for a big move. "It'll be strange around here without you," she sighed with regret. "Yeah, everything's already packed. I just wanted to chat with my old pal one last time before hitting the road. Listen, I'm trying to get in touch with a colleague at the Little Rock office. I'm not even sure if she's still there, so I was wondering if you could check the system and see if Sandy Thompson is still around." "Sure thing, Alan. Hang on a sec," Jane responded promptly, and for a few moments the only sound on the line was the rapid clicking of keys. After a brief pause, she came back on. "Yep, she's still with us at the same branch in Little Rock. Do you want her number, or should I patch you through directly?" "Oh, thanks a bunch for your help. Just put me through to her line. And Jane, sweetheart, take care of yourself. And if Paul ever decides to put a ring on it, I expect an invite," I joked. "Absolutely, Alan," Jane giggled. "And don't forget about us either." Okay, well, patch me through now. Thanks, Jane," I said, ready to talk. As Miri listened in on our casual chat, her brow furrowed, but her gaze remained fixed on me. "Hello? Sandy's on the line," a voice I hadn't heard in years announced. "Hi, Sandy. It's Alan Dowd from the Grenville office. I'm not sure if you remember me." "Good Lord, Alan Dowd. How could I forget? I've been dreaming of you for years, the man I wanted but never got, and now you're calling me out of the blue," Sandy exclaimed, laughing. "So how the hell have you been?" she asked, without pausing for an answer. "It's like telepathy, because believe it or not, I was just thinking about you recently. It's been, 16 years since we last spoke at that gala reception where we first met, remember? We bumped into each other at a few other events afterward, but never got a chance to catch up properly. But you know how hectic those crowded gatherings, important meetings, and all the other fuss can be." "Of course, I remember our first encounter in Washington," I interjected. "Actually, it's been 17 years, I corrected with a chuckle. Though besides the award ceremony itself, that night's a bit of a blur for me." "Oh, Alan, you were a riot that evening," Sandy reminisced, her voice filled with laughter. "What do you remember?" she asked, still chuckling. "Well, after my clumsy thank you speech, I remember leaving the stage, and then I think we were still sipping champagne at the table. But after that, it's all a bit fuzzy. It was probably the first and last time I got that drunk," I admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. Sandy's hearty laughter echoed through the phone. "Oh, you were quite the character by the end of the night, though honestly, compared to some others, you didn't drink that much," she teased. "Well, if you want honesty, Alan, I'll give it to you straight," she continued, her voice sly. "Go on, Miss Thompson, lay it on me," I replied, ready for her frankness. "It's quite amusing," I chimed in with my former colleague. "I have to confess, I had my eye on you that evening, even though I knew I had some serious competition from all the single ladies gathered there." "Oh, absolutely," Sandy chuckled. "You were like a tall, dark, handsome magnet drawing all the attention. It was like watching bees buzzing around a pot of honey." Sandy's infectious laughter made me join in, though I couldn't help but sneak a glance at Miri, who listened to Sandy's reminiscences with pursed lips, her expression turning sour when Sandy mentioned dragging me onto the dance floor. "Then, quite accidentally, I swear, I placed my hand, below and felt how, firm and substantial you were," Sandy continued, laughing. "Phew, things were heating up, weren't they?" "Haha, yeah, I nearly keeled over from that," I chuckled. Although being called Miri all evening was a bit awkward, it did show me how devoted you were to your wife. By around 11, you were muttering, "Miri, dear," again, and then simply passed out in your chair. When the party wrapped up after midnight and everyone retired to their rooms, you were still there in the hallway. So I enlisted the help of the night porter to get you to bed, Sandy recounted. I certainly didn't recall all of that, I remarked, listening intently to Sandy's account of that pivotal night, which marked the beginning of the end for Miranda and me. The tricky part was, no one knew which room you were assigned, and the hotel computers were offline for a scheduled update or something. I didn't delve too deeply into it. Long story short, the only logical solution at the time was to bring you to my room. And let me tell you, it was no easy feat moving a guy your size, especially when you were barely conscious, Sandy explained, with a pause on the line. There was some rustling on the other end of the line, then Sandy spoke again. Sorry about that. I took a couple of sips of water. All these memories have made me a bit feverish and parched, she confessed with a laugh. So where did I leave off? Right there. Well, I have to confess, at that moment, I was feeling a bit mischievous, she admitted, her voice tinged with embarrassment. I mentioned earlier how I accidentally, felt your, manhood when the receptionist and I were maneuvering you onto the bed. It was just a fleeting touch, but I immediately realized that you were not only tall, but also quite well endowed, if you catch my drift. She chuckled nervously into the phone. Unfortunately, you nearly passed out as we were getting you into the room, and then you just collapsed on the bed muttering something unintelligible. You know, even though I was tempted, Sandy sighed, I couldn't bring myself to do anything with someone who was practically unconscious. It just seemed wrong and against my principles. Nevertheless, I was a bit tipsy myself that night and feeling rather, aroused. So I decided to undress and lie down next to you, hoping that when you woke up and saw me, it might spark something between us. She sighed involuntarily once more. But clearly my little ploy didn't work because when I woke up in the morning, you were already gone. And despite my inquiries, no one had seen you for the rest of the weekend. So all I can say, Alan, is that your wife must be a very fortunate woman. Miri, her eyes widening in shock, covered her mouth with both hands as the gravity of her actions hit her like a thunderbolt. I must admit, at that moment, I felt no sympathy for my ex-wife, as her own rash decisions and arrogance were the root cause of our marriage's downfall. The subsequent calculated planning and years of scheming aimed solely at getting revenge on me only served to reinforce this belief. It was clear to me that I never truly knew the real Miri. Oh, about that, I replied. Now she's my ex-wife, and if I knew then what I know now, I probably would have taken you up on that tempting offer, I chuckled, answering Sandy. She laughed heartily. Well, honey, you're about 7 years too late if you were hoping to rekindle our connection. Now, I'm a very happily married woman with 2 wonderful children. I still use the last name Thompson at the office because all my clients know it and are accustomed to it. Actually, officially, I'm Sandy Roberts. I met Robert 8 years ago, and he was the first person after you who managed to find a way to my heart, she said with a touch of sentiment. A crease formed on Miri's tense forehead as she gripped the edges of the table, her face contorting into a pained grimace. She stared fixedly at the phone on the table as if it were a coiled viper ready to strike. Observing Miranda's reaction, I was perplexed, as I couldn't quite grasp its significance. By the way, it's because of Rob that I thought about you, buddy. Isn't that strange? She laughed. Well, the thing is, his older brother Dan is getting married in a couple of weeks, and his fiancée, named Andy like you, has the last name Daoud. So I wondered if she was your relative, because you're the only person named Daoud among the people I know. Now I understood Mary's reaction. I can't say that's so. Among my relatives, there's no one named Andy, I said with a hint of irony, glancing at Miri. Although, come to think of it, I remember the only relative I knew with such a name was still in high school. It's been so long that I almost forgot about it. I grinned, looking pointedly at Miranda, who blushed and looked away, lips pursed in embarrassment. I really didn't know the real her anymore, but no one would mistake Andy for a guy now. She's gorgeous. She has amazing children, Kelly and Luke, who are now in college. Kelly and Dan's daughter Cassie are best friends and share a room in Florida. They were both bridesmaids in my wedding, and Luke was Rob's usher. He did a great job preparing the ceremony and entertaining the guests, I reminisced. Yes, a great guy, let me tell you. Sandy's last words made me ponder. As I mechanically assented to her, her tone grew more serious, and she began speaking more quietly. Actually, Alan, to be honest, I don't think they should get married because even if they go through with it, their marriage is doomed from the start. I was surprised. Why do you think so? What could stop them since they've been together for so long? Miri, being directly involved, was even more astonished than I was. Her eyebrows shot up, mouth agape as she leaned forward tensely. Lord, Alan, because they're both serial cheaters. I mean, Dan also cheated on his first wife, Lisa, with Andy. I don't know how or why he did it, much less why he did it. Lisa, I assure you, was also stunning, although I never actually met her. I saw her photographs. Anyway, Andy and I had a frank conversation about this one day, and she told me that her husband and children understand that she has a husband at work and a husband at home. She explained how she divided her time between the two of them, while her husband at home had a similar arrangement with a woman he worked with. Can you imagine such a relationship? Yeah, I muttered, unsuccessfully trying to catch Miranda's stubbornly elusive gaze, as she avoided looking into my eyes. Her cheeks, neck, and even part of her chest were flushed a deep shade of red, matching the intensity of her embarrassment. I made it clear to Rob that I would not hesitate to confront him if he ever entertained such thoughts. Sandy shared her firm stance on this matter with confident resolve, then casually dropped a bombshell, unwittingly targeting my ex. Well, Dan still has someone on his side despite his relationship with Andy. That seems to be his modus operandi. I believe this dog always has a backup plan, she snorted. His current girlfriend's name is Tilly, and he sees her every time he's in Chicago, according to what Rob told me. Apparently, he arranges these business trips specifically to visit her every couple of weeks. Observing Miri's reaction, I noticed her complexion shift from bright red to first pale, then even a hint of green. Leaning on the table, she silently struggled for air, seeming on the brink of vomiting right then and there. Sandy continued to enthusiastically relay the latest updates from my former inner circle. Damn, I doubt they would have tied the knot if his bosses hadn't insisted he marry Andy after her ex sued the company following their divorce. Can you believe it, Alan? Her husband at home had a completely different take on their relationship and wouldn't tolerate the chaos. Some men still have integrity, huh? Rob confided that the company had to cough up a hefty sum to settle the matter. $100,000. Just great, I thought to myself. And on top of that, they gave Dan an ultimatum. He has to clean up the mess or they'll kick him out. What do you think? Not exactly the ideal foundation for starting a life together, is it? Continue cheating on your bride while staring down the barrel of a loaded weapon. Miri sprang up, knocking over a chair as she stumbled into the bathroom, where seconds later, I heard her retching. I couldn't blame her. After today's revelations, her carefully constructed world had been shattered and literally flushed down the drain. The Dan she believed to be honest, loving, and faithful turned out to be a fraud. But thankfully, that was no longer my concern. I conversed with Sandy for a few more minutes, during which she affectionately shared stories about her children and inquired about my plans. I informed her that based on my former company's recommendation, I was applying for a position at an insurance branch near my mother's house. Instead of the usual insurance sales, the job involved investigating suspicious insurance cases, an intriguing and fresh challenge for me. While the pay wouldn't match my previous earnings, it would still comfortably meet my needs. Additionally, the new role came with a personal office and assistant, signaling a positive step forward in my career. As Miranda returned, visibly exhausted, I concluded my talk with Sandy, exchanging contact details and pledging to stay in touch occasionally. After bidding farewell to Sandy and ending the call, I turned to Miri. My ex-wife appeared visibly distressed, her face damp, pale, and forlorn, with most of her meticulously applied makeup smudged or washed away. In just 15 minutes, Miranda seemed to have aged years before my eyes. "You look exhausted," I remarked sympathetically, as she slumped into a chair, burying her head in her arms. This time her distress felt genuine. "I am, Alan, I really am," she murmured, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Listen, I'm pressed for time. I need to pursue a lead while it's still fresh. By morning I should be in Brunswick," I replied, glancing at my watch briefly. The drive from here to Brunswick typically took about 6 hours without breaks, but I anticipated making a couple of stops along the way. "All these boxes are yours. They contain all the clothes, photographs, and other stuff that you left." I gestured towards the packages piled up in the corridor near the entrance. "I plan to send them to you next week, but since you're here, I can help by loading them into your car if you'd like," I offered in a composed tone, guided by the enduring politeness instilled in me by my upbringing. "Actually, can I ask you a big favor?" she murmured softly, lacking the courage to meet my gaze. Can I stay here for the night?" I don't think I could go back home there right now. I pondered for a moment, idly playing with a set of keys on my finger before selecting a couple and placing them on the table in front of her. Why not? Here are your keys and you have my permission. Stay. But when you leave, you'll need to drop them off at the real estate office. Consider yourself warned, I informed Miri. New tenants are arriving on Monday, so you have a full 9 days here, if you need them. This Sunday, some people will come to help me get rid of unnecessary items and clean the apartment. Utilities will be operational until Monday. Finally, I scanned the room once more and mentally chided myself. Approaching the mantelpiece, I retrieved a greeting card left behind by my thoughtful former colleagues from my previous job. In my new abode, their genuine warmth and kindness will continue to uplift me. Now all that's left is to bid a final farewell to my ex. All right, it's all done. Take care, Miri. I really must be off. Goodbye. I hope we never cross paths again. As I exited, I cast one last glance at the woman I once loved wholeheartedly. All that lingers in my mind is the image of a broken figure, shoulders slumped at the table, overcome with painful sobs.